Okay, well, my history doesn't go back as far, but but I'll just start from the beginning. So I studied architecture at Deakin University in Geelong, and I'd done 3 years of architecture, and I thought, oh, this is hard work. I'm not finding my passion for designing. And then I took a year off, as most architecture students do. And I went overseas and lived in England for a year, and then did 2 months around Europe backpacking. And being a tea lady in the Land Registry office in Croydon, ringing my bell and walking down the hallways and nobody even asking me who I was and any questions, gave me great drive to go back to Australia and finish my architecture degree. But also the trip around Europe. And I did an elective in my 3rd year called Soundings in European Art. So art history really got me into my passion for heritage, and there's so many alignments on having a good background in art history can really help you in understanding history, heritage, architecture, all those sorts of things, and that language. So that was something that when I went around Europe, I was traveling around Europe with a marketing student, and she was all on development and marketing and how economics drove Europe, and I was all about the history of the buildings and the art, and so we went really well together, and I thought that was just a really great experience. So anyway, I came back to Deakin, and so in the first 3 years of architecture it was very mainstream, other than that lovely elective in European art. But I was lucky enough to have, before the Masters of Urban Cultural Heritage, or the Cultural Heritage course that Susan prepared, that wasn't around when I was at university, but there were beginnings of it with Lorraine Huddle and Helen Lardner had done a subject on the Borough Charter, and there was an elective that was sort of taken from Melbourne Uni that Lorraine Huddle was running, that was history of building construction. So that was based on Miles Lewis's course that he was or subject that he was running at Melbourne Uni. So I chose those 2 electives, and then I just hit the ground running. I just realized that heritage was my thing. It was more the conservation, the thinking, the investigation, the all the sorts of things, that it wasn't just architecture, it was so many other things that came together to work out the history of buildings, and it just fascinated me, and how they'd changed, and what their context and everything about them. So it just grabbed me so much. I come from a background of my father's an ecologist and worked in conservation, so I just knew that it was sort of I did something different to be a bit of a rebel. But we've come back together, and we actually gave a conference paper together for an ICAHUCH conference one year on a natural and heritage site, which is just beautiful things. So I had that background of conservation thinking. It's a theory and a way of approaching things. So I did my 2 years of architecture. I did as much as my final 2 years of architecture. I did a thesis that was research-based, which wasn't it was a bit frowned upon at that time. It wasn't a design thesis. I did it on the conversion of churches to non-ecclesiastical uses. So I had 12 case studies where I looked at churches around Victoria that had been converted to new uses. And I determined, I assessed whether the significance had been retained in that conversion, and what might be the best way, what would be a good use of a church or conversion of a church that still retains the significance, and the sort of, so very analytical, I suppose, but very practical at the same time. So that was my strength. And I also made connections with, it was also a way of making connections with the heritage industry in my final year, so I could set myself up to go out into that area, because I knew that's where I wanted to go. Wendy Jacobs, a conservation architect in Ballarat. I grew up in Ballarat. She came and did a guest lecture. I approached her and said, can I do some work with you over the holidays? And I did. And so then my first job when I left uni was working for Wendy Jacobs in Ballarat. She did conservation management plans, but she also did design for extensions, primarily worked in the heritage area, but she had that design aspect as well, which was great for a young architect to have both experiences early on. And she was also doing a couple of heritage studies. So I was very introduced to that very early on. So this was 1997. I also volunteered for the National Trust and worked at the old Melbourne jail one day a week as just in the ticket office. I wasn't impressed by how the National Trust treated the volunteers, but you know, I'm back there now to change that. I never thought that would happen. But anyway, so, and Wendy was always telling me to go and get work in Melbourne, and she was very encouraging. I had very good mentors, strong female mentors. Lorraine Huddle was amazing. She was my supervisor for my thesis and was very supportive. And when a job came up at Heritage Victoria in my first year out, they both encouraged me to go for it. So I did, and I didn't get the job. Peter Mills got the job. But then Heritage Victoria, because I'd gone in for the interview, they had a project, and they then interviewed for a project, I don't know, about a couple of months later, and I got a job doing assessments, transferring the government building register over to the heritage register. So there was a separate government buildings register of places that weren't necessarily of state significance. So we had to sort of sieve through lots of primary schools, railway stations, hospitals, courthouses. I got to travel all around Victoria looking at all these buildings and transferring the ones that were assessed as being of state significance over to the register and taking the other ones off the register. So that was a wonderful experience. So I ended up working for Heritage Victoria for 2.5 years. And I also had a habit of having 2 jobs at the same time. I had the opportunity to go for an interview with Helen Lardner, conservation architect, and ended up getting a job with her part-time and staying with Heritage Victoria part-time because I didn't feel like I was finished there yet. But then after 6 months, I realised that my heart was working in the field. Very practical person. Heritage Victoria gave me a great understanding of the strategic framework around heritage in Victoria. And yeah, it was invaluable, and I've still got many friends that I work there. It was under the direction of the wonderful Ray Tonkin. So I catch up with him for lunch every 2 weeks still. So yeah. So that was great. And then I worked with Helen Lardner for 10 years. And yeah, so I got to do everything. So one of the great things about Helen's office was we did architectural work as well. So I managed to get registered as an architect during that time, mainly based on doing Point Nepean, conservation works at Point Nepean, when it was still federal, still Department of Defence owned before they handed over to the state. So that was working on 22 buildings, doing contract admin for that project, as well as all the documentation. So that gave me enough for registration. So I was very lucky. Not all people who go straight into heritage architecture can get the registration experience with heritage consultants. But I also did lots of conservation management plans. And also while I was working for Helen, I started in local government, so as a heritage advisor. So I was the heritage advisor for Whitehorse City Council for 10 years, working 1 day a week within the planning department. So I sat with the planning department 1 day a week. That also was invaluable because a lot of our heritage is protected at a local level, and understanding that planning framework for heritage is also invaluable because that's where a lot of the work is as well. Heritage studies, assessments of significance. There's so much to be done. I'm a complete advocate for local heritage. I'm on the Heritage Council's local heritage advisory committee, and I'm still a heritage advisor. So after working for Helen for 10 years, I went out on my own and became a sole practitioner, mainly doing heritage advisor work. So I'm a heritage advisor for Colac, Otway, Nillumbik and Corangamite Shire. And I have a passion for rural or regional heritage, and I feel like it's more of a community service out there than the pressures of development. And it's about, as Graham says, it's the education side of things. I feel like the cities, the metropolitan areas have become too much about protection and not enough about why we're valuing our heritage. And I still feel that the regional areas have that, and there's so much it's so rewarding talking to building owners out there and the regional communities, because they don't have that pressure, but they also, I don't know, I feel like they value their heritage a bit more as well. They see it not from an economic term, but as a place. This is a place, and valuing where they live. So then I'm the conservation architect for the National Trust, and that came about through firstly going in there as the Victorian Heritage Restoration Program architect and assessing places for funding in Melbourne City Council and Yarra and now Ballarat, and then moving my way into the senior team as the conservation architect, because after being there for a few years, I realised that they needed a conservation architect on board. They hadn't had one for over 20 years. So there wasn't an in-house conservation architect, not that they hadn't used a conservation architect previously. I don't know about my timing, Hannah. Am I going?
Yep, that's probably wrap up. That's it. Time.
Okay. So just changes in the heritage sector, as I've sort of touched on. I feel like it's become more about the statutory framework too much and not enough about the education side of things. And I'd love to see more focus on heritage as a way of well-being. There's other ways of protecting heritage, so more about interpretation of heritage. And heritage isn't just about statutory protection. It's not just about the economics. So I think the challenge for graduates is to really shift back. We've gone too far, I think, in the statutory protection way, and I think it's time to really grasp on other ways we can protect heritage and raise its value. Get into government and talk about how it's part of sustainability, it's part of well-being, that heritage is important and it should be thought of in the same way that sustainability is thought of. And also shared values, that's a really important part that we need to be thinking more about, the range of values, not just about, just shared values as a whole, trying to marry all of the different values. It's still a challenge. So I think that's it.